Good morning, spiritual companions. We are reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, continuing the introduction on page 62. Pilgrimage. On January 27th, 1868, Mathur Babu, with a party of some 125 persons, set out on a pilgrimage to the sacred places of northern India. At Vidyanath in Bihar, when the master saw the inhabitants of a village reduced by disease and starvation to mere skeletons, he requested his rich patron to feed the people and give each a piece of cloth. Mathur demurred at the added expense. The master declared bitterly that he would not go on to Benares, but would live with the poor and share their miseries. He actually left Mathur and sat down with the villagers, whereupon Mathur had to yield. On another occasion, 2 years later, Sri Ramakrishna showed a similar sentiment for the poor and needy. He accompanied Mathur on a tour to one of the latter's estates at the time of the collection of rents. For 2 years the harvests had failed, and the tenants were in a state of extreme poverty. The master asked Mathur to remit their rents, distribute help to them, and in addition, give the hungry people a sumptuous feast. When Mathur grumbled, the master said, "You are only the steward of the Divine Mother. They are the Mother's tenants. You must spend the Mother's money. When they are suffering, how can you refuse? You must help them." Again, Mathur had to give in. Sri Ramakrishna's sympathy for the poor sprang from his perception of God in all created beings. His sentiment was not that of the humanist to philanthropist. To him, the service of man was the same as the worship of God. The party entered holy Benares by boat along the Ganges. When Sri Ramakrishna's eyes fell on this city of Shiva, where had accumulated for ages the devotion and piety of countless worshippers, he saw it to be made of gold, as the scriptures declare. He was visibly moved. During his stay in the city, he treated every particle of its earth with utmost respect. At the Manikarnika Ghat, the great cremation ground of the city, he actually saw Shiva, with ash-covered body and tawny matted hair, serenely approaching each funeral pyre and breathing into the ears of the corpses the mantra of liberation, and then the Divine Mother removing from the dead their bonds. Thus he realized the significance of the scriptural statement that anyone dying in Benares attains salvation through Shiva's grace. He paid a visit to Trilanga Swami, the celebrated monk, whom he later declared to be a real Paramahansa, a veritable image of Shiva. Sri Ramakrishna visited Allahabad at the confluence of the Ganges and the Jama, and then proceeded to Vrindavan and Mathura, hallowed by the legends, songs, and dramas about Krishna and the gopis. Here he had numerous visions, and his heart overflowed with divine emotion. He wept and said, "O Krishna, everything here is as it was in the olden days. You alone are absent." He visited the great woman saint Gangamaya, regarded by Vaishnava devotees as the reincarnation of an intimate attendant of Radha. She was 60 years old and had frequent trances. She spoke of Sri Ramakrishna as an incarnation of Radha. With great difficulty, he was persuaded to leave her. On the return journey, Mathur wanted to visit Gaya, but Sri Ramakrishna declined to go. He recalled his father's vision at Gaya before his own birth, and felt that in the temple of Vishnu he would become permanently absorbed in God. Mathur, honoring the master's wish, returned with his party to Calcutta. From Vrindavan the master had brought a handful of dust. Part of this he scattered in the Panchavati. The rest he buried in the little hut where he had practiced meditation. Now this place, he said, is as sacred as Vrindavan. In 1870, the master went on a pilgrimage to Nadia, the birthplace of Sri Chaitanya. As the boat by which he traveled approached the sandbank close to Nadia, Sri Ramakrishna had a vision of the two brothers, Sri Chaitanya and his companion Nityananda, bright as molten gold and with halos, rushing to greet him with uplifted hands. There they come, he cried. They entered his body, and he went into a deep trance. Relation with his wife. In 1872, Sarada Devi paid her first visit to her husband at Dakshineswar. 4 years earlier, she had seen him at Kamarpukur and had tasted the bliss of his divine company. Since then, she had become even more gentle, tender, introspective, serious, and unselfish. She had heard many rumors about her husband's insanity. People had shown her pity in her misfortune. The more she thought, the more she felt that her duty was to be with him, giving him, in whatever measure she could, a wife's devoted service. She was now 18 years old. Accompanied by her father, she arrived at Dakshineswar, having come on foot the distance of 80 miles. She had had an attack of fever on the way. When she arrived at the temple garden, the master said sorrowfully, "Ah, you have come too late. My Mathur is no longer here to look after you." Mathur had passed away the previous year. The master took up the duty of instructing his young wife, and this included everything from housekeeping to the knowledge of Brahman. He taught her how to trim a lamp, how to behave toward people according to their differing temperaments, and how to conduct herself before visitors. He instructed her in the mysteries of spiritual life, prayer, meditation, japa, deep contemplation, and samadhi. The first lesson that Sarada Devi received was, God is everybody's beloved, just as the moon is dear to every child. Everyone has the same right to pray to him. Out of his grace, he reveals himself to all who call upon him. You too will see him if you but pray to him. Totapuri, coming to know of the master's marriage, had once remarked, "What does it matter? He alone is firmly established in the knowledge of Brahman, who can adhere to his spirit of discrimination and renunciation even while living with his wife. He alone has attained the supreme illumination, who can look on man and woman alike as Brahman. A man who discriminates about sex may be a good aspirant, but he is still far from the goal." Sri Ramakrishna and his wife lived together at Dakshineswar, but their minds always soared above the worldly plane. A few months after Sarada Devi's arrival, Sri Ramakrishna arranged, on an auspicious day, a special ritualistic worship of Kali. Instead of an image of the deity, he placed on the seat the living image, Sarada Devi herself. The worshipper and the worshipped went into deep samadhi, and in the transcendental plane their souls were united. After several hours, Sri Ramakrishna came down again to the relative plane, sang a hymn to the great goddess, and surrendered, at the feet of the living image, himself, his rosary, and the fruit of his lifelong sadhana. This is known in Tantra as the Surasi Puja, the adoration of woman. Sri Ramakrishna realized the significance of the great statement of the Upanishad, O Lord, thou art the woman, thou art the man, thou art the boy, thou art the girl, thou art the old, tottering on their crutches, thou pervadest the universe in its multiple forms. By his marriage, Sri Ramakrishna admitted the great value of marriage in man's spiritual evolution, and by adhering to his monastic vows, he demonstrated the imperative necessity of self-control, purity, and continence for the realization of God. By his unique spiritual relationship with his wife, he proved that husband and wife can live together as spiritual companions. Thus, his life is a synthesis of the ways of life of the householder and the monk. The, quote, ego, end quote, of the master. In the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Sri Ramakrishna had realized that Brahman alone is real and the world is illusory. By keeping his mind 6 months on the plane of the non-dual Brahman, he had attained to the state of Vijnani, the knower of truth, in a special and very rich sense, who sees Brahman not only in himself and in the transcendental absolute, but in everything of the world. In this state of Vijnana, sometimes bereft of body consciousness, he would regard himself as one with Brahman. Sometimes, conscious of the dual world, he would regard himself as God's devotee, servant, or child. In order to enable the Master to work for the welfare of humanity, the Divine Mother had kept in him a trace of ego, in which he described, according to his mood, as the ego of knowledge, the ego of devotion, the ego of a child, or the ego of a servant. In any case, this ego of the Master, consumed by the fire of the knowledge of Brahman, was an appearance only, like a burnt string. He often referred to this ego as the ripe ego, in contrast with the ego of the bound soul, which he described as the unripe or green ego. The ego of the bound soul identifies itself with the body, relatives, possessions, and the world. But the ripe ego, illumined by divine knowledge, knows the body, relatives, possessions, and the world to be unreal, and establishes a relationship of love with God alone. Through this ripe ego, Sri Ramakrishna dealt with the world and his wife. One day, while stroking his feet, Sarada Devi asked the Master, "What do you think of me?" Quick came the answer, "The mother who is worshipped in the temple is the mother who has given birth to my body and is now living in the Nahabat, and it is she again who is stroking my feet at this moment. Indeed, I always look on you as the personification of the blissful Mother Kali." Sarada Devi, in the company of her husband, had rare spiritual experiences. She said, "I have no words to describe my wonderful exaltation of spirit as I watched him in his different moods. Under the influence of divine emotion, he would sometimes talk on abstruse subjects, sometimes laugh, sometimes weep, and sometimes become perfectly motionless in samadhi. This would continue throughout the night. There was such an extraordinary divine presence in him that now and then I would shake with fear and wonder how the night would pass. Months went by in this way. Then one day he discovered that I had to keep awake the whole night, lest, during my sleep, he should go into samadhi, for it might happen at any moment. So he asked me to sleep in the Nahabat. End of that section.